I'm pretty sure that others will be joining, throughout our Pau Hana. But I think we should get started. Harvey, thanks for joining. Peter, John, good to see you again. Riley, Keith, I love how you have SEH behind your name. Michelle, looking forward to hearing how your model. It's a Model Y, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So we should do a Big Island EV gathering, and we'll get you there as well. Stan is on the phone. Jerry Chang just joined us. Ron, Riley, thanks for joining. So why don't we get started? We typically would go around the room and do intros, but I think we have so much to cover, and I think we need to dedicate as much of the time here to our guest and also Q&A. So happy Friday. Welcome to our Pau Hana. I'm recording this so that those who are not able to join us today will be able to share the knowledge we gain. And so I'd like to introduce our guest, and maybe she doesn't need to be introduced because I'm pretty sure that she's met many of you and engaged with many of you, but I'll do it anyway. Dear friend, she's been here for a relatively short period of time, but in record time has been able to integrate with our community, has actively immersed herself with the environment. I'm not sure I've met anybody who's lived in so many different locations around the island in so short a period of time. Connected with countless people in the community, with government, with business. And importantly, she brings a wealth of knowledge from her years as I hope I get this right, aerospace systems engineer and an innovator working on the challenge of space travel and habitation, essentially finding ways to, get life systems on other planets as an example. And she's been here. Brittany's been here with us before, and she shared her, the nature of her solution. And in essence, it's an innovative one that takes into account atmospheric carbon, seawater, and the waste stream to generate helpful products: biochar, carbon negative cement, potable water, and hydrogen. And importantly, the solution set allows us to mitigate carbon emissions and also draw down legacy carbon. And given all the excitement we're seeing around hydrogen, there's the announcement of the Hydrogen Hub. There's quite a bit of that in the news today. We're really looking forward, Brittany, to hearing about Yummet's H2 production strategy and the role that it may play in our journey towards a clean hydrogen economy. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and the table's yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noel. And great to see a lot of you familiar faces. For those of you who I have not met, I'll do a very brief synopsis of the background and kind of the solutions that we're working towards right now, and then segue that into a more direct conversation really about energy and green hydrogen. But my background is in the mechanical and aerospace engineering, as Noel was referring to. I designed aircraft for a long time and eventually translated into the aerospace, from the aerospace industry into the outer space industry. I got brought on to design greenhouse modules with NASA, specifically for lunar and Martian habitats. Did that for a long period of time. It ended up inventing a whole suite of different technologies. And that landed me as the youngest NASA principal investigator ever, very early in my career. I leveraged that and started utilizing the funds that I was bringing in to lead different teams through the development of technologies, from TRL1, which is just an initial idea or concept, all the way up through integration and commercialization. That was extremely fruitful for me. That led to patents and technologies on the International Space Station, flying with the Artemis program that's about to land us back on the moon, developing habitats and solutions slated for visits to the Martian surface, and a whole slew of stuff for the Department of Defense. I had a pretty big existential shift that really led to what we're doing now in the Yummet and climate atmosphere. And that was really propagated by two major things. For me, I'm an avid traveler, and I spent a lot of time in Latin America and South America. And I got word in late 2019 of a dear friend of mine who unfortunately contracted a waterborne illness that ended up being fatal. And I had a really hard time trying to come to terms with the idea that I was in her house with a laptop that was working to provide clean drinking water to people on the International Space Station, but at the same time, she didn't have access to clean enough drinking water to keep her own life. You know, and that was a really, really big moment for me in my life, and really started to motivate me to take my heads out of the clouds, like literally and figuratively, in saying, hey, we're developing all these solutions for celestial life support. Why are we not then bridging the gap and finding the terrestrial commercialization packages that could work for human betterment? And then additionally, and I think very relevantly to our conversation today, I also was running air revitalization programs. So as humans exhale, we exhale CO2. When we're in small volumes like space suits, that CO2 partial pressure builds up fairly quickly. It's my responsibility, right? Just scrub that CO2 and then regenerate oxygen. So that went fairly well. I got asked to lead a bunch of different projects, but ultimately that culminated in taking the lead for a project that was focused on colonization. So we were looking at bringing about 1 million people to the Martian surface. And when we look at colonization at that level, right, it's very, very exciting, but you're looking at global level technologies, problems, and solutions. Granted, it's not our particular globe, right, that we're looking at, but it's extremely important still. But if you know much about Mars, you'll know that the atmospheric composition of Mars is about 95% carbon dioxide. So it's a greenhouse gas planet already. So we're looking at how do we translate CO2s into breathable and useful things for our spacefarers, right? And when I'm kind of going through this transformation process and take a step back, this is another one of those, you know, I would say straws on my particular camel's back. And I was really like, hey, we have all these conversations about things that are going on in the climate space industry. Why are we not then bridging that conversation and having a real conversation about, you know, these solutions that we know of, right, that are high TRL, that have been executed in different arenas, and why are we not finding, right, the terrestrial counterpart, right, the commercialization package for that? So I was just in a really good position, particularly in my career at the time, and it was fantastic. I had been groomed as the CEO of a large private space organization. So in doing that, I was really being given the reins to lead the organization in a direction that I thought made a lot of sense. And for me, that was bridging that gap, right? Opening up those lines of communications. The further I went down that line, the more I realized that me and two of the board of directors didn't see eye to eye on that. And so being sat down, I was asked to give up that terrestrial component of the vision, and I just couldn't. So I decided to tackle that. And that was a pretty big ordeal in my life. That was definitely a turning point. I had custom made golden handcuffs. I'm telling you, they were powerfully strong. And so the decision to take those off and shed those was a big one. And so at the time, I was managing a group with NASA Johnson Space Center. I was managing a group internal to Boeing. I was helping 2 different university departments through the development of different space hardware. And I was managing 3 public-private partnerships. So I had a lot going on. And when the word came out that I was tackling this new endeavor, a bunch of people came forward and said they wanted to come with me. And that was really the genesis or the birth of our organization. Spelled Y-U-M-M-E-T, pronounced Yummet, got kind of a French flair. But it's a really exciting group of individuals. We've grown a lot. We're over 300 graduate level experts from more than 50 different countries. And we work together on climate solutions. And right now we're really focused on bringing a specific climate solution here to Hawaii. I'm very excited to dive more into that with you guys. But essentially what we do is we extract greenhouse gases directly from the environment. So we bring that in its liquidous form or aqueous form, its gaseous form, and also in solid forms, right? So we extract CO2s, CH4s, NOx, solid particulates, and we also bring in waste feedstocks that are very specific to different communities. So in some communities that we work with, that's municipal solid waste. In other communities, that's heavily agricultural waste. Some places it's industrial construction waste. But as long as there's carbon in its molecular chain, it's fair in terms of feedstock for us, right? So if you take a look at carbon dioxide, if we bring carbon dioxide into the system, carbon dioxide is a toxin because of the bond that exists between the carbon and the oxygen. So we actually break that bond. And then with the carbon, being free of the oxygen, we release the O2, and then we take that carbon and we translate it out of its gaseous form and into its solid form, which gives us a solid carbon to work with now, and do other things with. We do that with all of the different waste that comes into the system. And I'll explain how that leads to hydrogen here shortly. But we really took a biomimicry approach. So in this system, right, we're doing a lot of electrochemistry and a lot of organic chemistry. And in doing so, we're breaking down those bonds. And so we kind of end up with a pool of different commodities or goods. And in doing that, we took a look at Mother Nature and we said she breaks down waste, right? Oh, it takes geological times, but she takes that waste and she breaks it down and turns it into 4 commodities without any waste stream. She's always producing soils, minerals, atmosphere, and water. There's got to be a way that we can translate, right, what we're doing, what we're breaking down into those 4 commodities. So that's what we do. And so we have 4 different outputs of our system. We have our mineral. Our mineral we commercialize as a net negative alternative to concrete. For those of you who, this is what it looks like. Looks like concrete, but it's a way cooler than traditional concrete. It's entirely made from on-island waste. There's no release of any greenhouse gases in its production. There's nothing that needs to be mined or imported. And additionally, there's a lot of benefits to this particular material over traditional ordinary Portland cement-based materials. Its compressive strengths and its tensile strengths are fantastic. It doesn't have an interfacial transition zone, right? We have permeable and non-permeable versions. We can get super nerdy on that side of things another time. We'll try to focus this part on one of the other commodities that we're discussing, but that's one we're very passionate about. We extract the nutrients, nitrogens, phosphorus, and high-grade organic carbons from that process, and we produce something called a biochar, and that's our equivalent, right? That's Mother Nature. As we mimic Mother Nature, that's our equivalent to our soil. So it is, think of it as a soil enhancement product. It reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers. It provides a healthy home or a skyrise condo in the soil for the microbes that we need to proliferate to do so, increases crop yield, decreases the amount of water that's needed, and it also acts as a fantastic scrubber for people who are familiar with like activated carbons and things along those lines. It has very similar types of properties in its ability to immobilize heavy toxins and other pollutants that have been previously applied. We also work on inoculating one version of our biochar with a specific microbe that we isolated in a municipal solid waste facility in another state. And so we're working with a group specifically on microplastic conversions also. So that's really cool. And then finally, we make water and atmosphere. Water we produce in our system at very large quantities. It's potable drinking water. We actually have the first system in the world that can do desalination as the sea levels rise or do wastewater treatment with the production of absolutely no waste products. So there's no brine produced, there's no waste effluent that needs to be dealt with. So we've gotten, of course, a lot of traction in a lot of other places that are heavily dependent on desalination for their water intake. And then finally, I think the thing that we'll focus more of today on is our atmosphere, right? And the atmosphere that we produce is both O2 and H2 in our system. The O2 we want higher partial pressures of atmospherically, so we release that. There are times where we've been convinced, like during COVID, where there was a need for medical grade oxygen to tank some of that, but it's not something that we traditionally or commercially do. And the hydrogen we do. So we commercialize the hydrogen. Right now it's called green hydrogen, right? It fits all of the requirements for green hydrogen. I like to think it's way better than green hydrogen, but currently green hydrogen is kind of the tip of the iceberg and nobody wants another color of hydrogen. So it's green hydrogen. And I think that's one of the things we should, dive a little bit into today. So we produce green hydrogen in our system in 2 different ways. We do an electrochemical process to produce some, and we also have a thermal process that produces hydrogen. They are slightly different in terms of output, and we utilize them for different things. But we look at both of them, I think at the pros and cons of generating both of them and what their utilization capabilities and potentials are. So one of the things we've been talking to Noel et al. About and other people on the island is really what that means for Hawaii, right? When I talk about all of the different products that we make, when you talk about concrete, there is a very decent concrete market. There's a big agricultural community and market already, right? Water is definitely a thing that's here. But when we start having conversations about hydrogen, it's a little bit different, right? It's more of a nascent market. So it opens up, I think, a couple of different, rabbit holes that are definitely fun to dive down. But it opens up an ability to have a conversation and also, I think, push a lot of the community members together, and I hope eventually in similar directions so that we can kind of band behind, how we want to do things. And just to give a high level idea of what's going on right in the industry right now, I think most of you are very well aware, but for those of you that aren't, right, there's a lot of conversations about hydrogen in transportation. Right, there's kind of this EV versus hydrogen fuel cell applications, and there's a third one, right? Cummins and some other organizations are actually working on drop-in hydrogen combustion engines also as direct switch out components as well. So, just to make things a little more complicated, there's kind of a third thing entering the market right now, which I'm sure, Riley, you're very happy about. But so we can dive into kind of what the benefits, I think, are of all of the different ways to approach hydrogen in the transportation market. Also, then we talk about the storage and transportation of hydrogen is another very big topic in the industry right now. We look at hydrogen, right, in its raw form. We look at, in its gaseous form. We look at the compression and cryogenic storage and transport of hydrogen as an option. And then we also look at some pretty interesting things more on utilizing hydrogen in its solid form or in its aqueous form, utilizing other substances that can be a carrier for hydrogen. And I think one that we heard about a lot in the meetings over the last couple of days, and definitely in the industry, is ammonia as an option for that. There are others besides ammonia, but I think ammonia is really grabbing a lot of traction. And there are certainly some pros and cons as we have conversations about which directions we want to go, both on the transportation side of fuel cell versus combustion, right? Also then as we dive into conversations specifically around how do we want to transport. Now, in terms of transport, I think that's going to be an interesting thing for us because here on this particular island, I'm currently on the Big Island, right, Hawaii Island, and there's a lot of potential for hydrogen generation here, not only through our systems, but also through, some other viable options that are being thrown into the arena also. And a lot of people are looking at Hawaii Island as a fantastic place to be able to generate large-scale hydrogen because of some of the natural resources that exist here. But we are also looking at, a system or solution like what we're bringing to the table allows that to also be generated on any of the islands, really, right? You don't have to have a geothermal source or a large photovoltaic installation or anything along those lines to be able to produce hydrogen at very decent scales. For example, we are looking here at this particular island, and we make a lot of grand assumptions. We're saying, hey, if we didn't have access to the municipal solid waste and we were, required to help with maybe some more of the commercial wastes or green wastes or, plastics, glasses, some metal waste type stuff here, what does that look like at scaling for us, right? And for us, this is a very, very, very small system, right? This is just about as small as we typically look at going. But even at that scale, right, at our smallest scale, and I think we started talking about this, Noel, it's about 5.5 tons a day of green hydrogen that we produce at our smallest scale operation. And that is not being optimized off of hydrogen. So there's a lot of room to turn that dial up or down. And then we have our larger scale facilities that do much orders of magnitude more than that. And so we're looking at a lot of different interesting options, right? As we look at decentralized approaches, which we are, I think moving more and more towards in terms of island implementation, we get to have a lot of conversations about, how do we reduce the logistics so that we're not having to ship things, into a million different places? And maybe we take a concrete style model with it, right? as you guys are probably aware, there aren't like giant concrete manufacturing hubs around the world that then ship concrete everywhere. It's a different approach. You build up concrete locally, right? And so you have these mobile batch plants, and you have maybe smaller groups that service their adjacent communities. Well, as we look at decentralizing energy solutions, which I think is imperative for the direction that we want to go, in terms of stability, in terms of redundancy, right, in terms of access, it becomes, I think, a more and more viable solution than, I think the standard approach that we've fallen into in terms of what today's practices are. So the ability to take, maybe a couple of different, 5.5 to 15 tons a day type options and strategically place them on different islands, right? That can reduce a lot of the transport that needs to happen. So those are a lot of the things that we're diving into right now. On the transport side of things, just so that you know where we're at organizationally, we're actually looking at doing a mixed approach. So we do hydrogen in its gaseous form, right? We can compress that, but we also do ammonia as a carrier as an option also. Traditionally, right, upwards of 30% or so of hydrogen, it gets placed into ammonia applications already. So being able to store that, right, and transport that in specific ways is extremely beneficial. But I think that as we look at the longevity, I think of ammonia, and I might get some backlash for this, so bear with me here. But we definitely look at ammonia as an option for a specific industry. It's definitely beneficial for a specific industry. And we think it's a short-term solution for some of the storage issues that we're facing. But we think that, in the long term, there's a major energy inefficiency to translating to ammonia and then back into hydrogen if it's actually hydrogen that you're after. There are some options as well that look at utilizing ammonia as a raw fuel source, right? The combustion specifically of ammonia, that comes with some of its own pros and cons as well. But I think that what we're going to end up seeing in an industry is a mix of all of these things, right? I don't think it has to be, hey, we need to implement one solution and make everybody work towards that solution. I think we're going to be seeing this come out in stages because there are lots of applications where we need ammonia. There are lots of applications where we need raw hydrogen and we don't want to deal with the energy loss. And as technology progresses and advances, a lot of those things are doable today, right? Of course. I think you guys may have seen, we do have one large ship, right, out in the Asia Pacific area that has the capability of moving large amounts of cryogenic hydrogens already. So I think we'll see a replication of that. And then for the safety side of things, it's really interesting too, right? We look at two different things. We look at what's the potential, right? And the thing that people talk about most in terms of explosiveness, right? Is it dangerous on that side of things? And then the other thing is the environmental impact. So while it's much easier and it is less explosive, right, in terms of the size of explosion that you would get with ammonia transportation, it's really, really important to also recognize that that could lead to some issues, right? As we look at what a leak would ascertain, but what we could ascertain from a leak specifically in hydrogen is very, very different than if we're on a fuel tanker, right, that is now carrying ammonia and experience a leak, right? In terms of ecological devastation, you'd much, much, much rather have hydrogen that's escaping to space, right, be the consequence, which isn't truly a consequence other than, financially and operationally. And if you have ammonia, if you have aqueous ammonia that's leaking, that could be devastational. So we need to take those things into consideration also, which I don't think has been a big topic of conversation that I think really does need to be thrown out there as we dive into some of the directions that we want to go as an industry. But as far as the hydrogen side of things, like I said, we start pretty small in the 5.5-ish tons a day and scale up from there. And when we talk about green hydrogen, right, there are a lot of standards that are already in place for the cleanliness, right, or the quality of hydrogen for transportation applications, for fueling applications, and things along those lines. So the type of hydrogen that we produce in our system far exceeds the requirements for typical vehicles. But we also need to look at how this may integrate with some of the technologies, right, that are doing, I think, fantastic and innovative things in the space of transportation, not only on Big Island, which I think is fantastically a leader, but I think there's a lot of motion, obviously, on Oahu and some of the other outer islands. So that's what we're working on currently and right now. I would love to open up discussion, Noelle. I'm happy to take questions, dive deeper into the hydrogen space, anything that you guys think is appropriate and or necessary.
I'll kick it off with maybe a couple of questions, and thanks very much for that. I've listened to your presentations multiple times, and every time I learn something new. So, mahalo for joining us today. A couple of questions. One is related to economics. So, as you hinted at, hydrogen production in general, there is we're talking about electrolyzed hydrogen. There's quite a bit of energy that goes into it, and ideally that's green, right? That's renewable energy. So geothermal is an example. But there's also the the physics of it, right? I mean, there's a lot of energy that's lost in the creation of hydrogen, and then also transport and then conversion back to some energy, like through a fuel cell. But also with ammonia, if you want to crack that and create hydrogen again, there are energy losses, right? So, but it sounds
70% energy loss. So it's really it's significant.
Yeah. So as we look at these solutions, I think it's really important for us to look at the sort of like the overall efficiency of the process, right, cradle to cradle, and also overall impact, environmental impact, cradle to cradle.
Yes.
But it sounds like the process that you're utilizing, it's curious because there's not like necessarily an energy input that's obvious, right? It's like you've got the stuff that's in there, and then something happens, and there's the energy that's required to generate all these products. So, can you comment about the efficiency, if there's a way to describe that, and then importantly, how that translates to in terms of economics? Because at the end of the day, to be able to produce hydrogen at a rate that would be affordable, you would need really, really cheap electricity, right? For that to be a reality. So maybe speak to efficiency, and then also how that might translate into as far as the cost per kilogram, or something that we can kind of wrap our heads around.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of the energy input, right? That's I think the first thing that you were poking at there. It's really interesting in our particular system. It's very innovative on the energy side of things, in that it is a renewable energy source, but not the traditional solar, wind, or geothermal inputs, right? When I told you that we go through the process of breaking those carbon chains apart, it's an autothermic reaction. So the way that I've tried to explain this is it's a reaction very similar to sparklers that children utilize at the 4th of July. You know how you have to light it with you take a lighter and you light the end of it, and then there's this reaction that occurs because of it. That activation energy, or that lighter at the beginning, is still necessary in our system, but this breaking of these bonds actually produce a large amount of heat energy. And in the same way, right, that your sparkler produces some heat and some light, right, which are their own forms of energy, this process does that as well. So in doing that, we then pair that with something called cogeneration. And what cogeneration does is it leverages some thermal energy as thermal energy, and then it leverages some thermal energy as electrical energy, right? So that electrical energy is actually balanced within our system, right? We did our mass and energy balances, and it's actually what powers our entire facility. So we are an off-grid solution, but it's not in the traditional sense of solar or wind or anything along those lines. So because we have, right, this fairly cheap form of energy that's balanced specifically for our system, it allows us to break, not only break these bonds apart in effective manners and put, it back together in ways that produce pretty cool commodities. It also allows us to utilize any of the excess electrical energy that we have for things that are of interest to us, right? That means we can do more hydrogen production if we wanted to add on additional electrolysis capability at the end of our system. Let's say, communities weren't interested in as much water and wanted more hydrogen, right? That's an option and a capability for us. We do something that's very similar to PEM electrolysis. It's not exactly the same. It is an electrochemical process, though, so there is an electrical energy input, right? And so that's very, very important, and to understand where that energy is coming from. And for us, it's coming from our autothermic reaction, right? And that exothermic energy is what's being captured and translated, which gives us a very fantastic advantage, in terms of the hydrogen space that leads very closely to the economics, right, Noelle? So for us, right, we compete in different places and in different arenas, right? There's different prices. But as we dive into what that looks like here, right, our first go and estimations at what hydrogen prices specifically here in Hawaii would be before we had our full scale operation up and running is pretty low, right? We're looking at about $3 per kilogram out of the get-go before we're able to scale up. So that's, at least competitive in certain arenas. In some of our larger facilities, and when we get to full scale, we can drop that down and we can be competitive with 30 hydrogen prices. So that's, for us, a big W, right? And I think for the community also in terms of access to clean and viable energies as well. So yeah, I would say for us, the efficiencies for us are really in the fact that we're also cross-subsidized with our other products, right? We utilize and leverage waste energies, waste heat throughout our entire system, and we leverage that into the production of all four of our commodities simultaneously. So it also gives us a little bit of a buffer in terms of what we can do across all of our commodities.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Does anyone so if you have a question for Brittany, just raise your virtual hand and I'll be able to see you on the screen. There you go. Ron, go ahead.
Let me unmute here. Thanks so much, Brittany. That's just amazing. It seems like you've glommed on to kind of this magic sparkler, and I guess what I'm wondering is that something that you invented or others invented? Are there scientific articles that we can access that describe it, or is it a secret, proprietary, patented process?
A little bit of both is the answer. There are other systems that can do this type of energy generation, and I'd be more than happy to share with you those. We have patented, and we do have proprietary, I'll say, deviations to that make ours more efficient than the other commercial off-the-shelf options. But they have been utilized in a lot of different industries for very long periods of time. So they are very high TRL technologies. It's not something that was just a recent breakthrough or anything along those lines. We've just found ways to do it much more efficiently.
Okay, thanks so much for that. And if I can,
absolutely.
You mentioned at your last meeting a facility, and I wasn't sure if it was in operation or planned for Savannah, Georgia, and the figure that jumped out to me was 1 million metric tons of CO2 per year, and 42 of those facilities around the world would take care of all our human CO2 emissions. And I'm just flabbergasted. And how can I get more information about that? And is it up and running, or is it something that's planned?
Yeah, perfect. Love the question. Thank you so much. So in terms of what we've physically operated and what is operational now, we started with 5 different working facilities or different subsystems throughout the United States. Those were in, San Diego, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Arizona, Colorado, and St. Paul. The one that is still operational and still producing right now is in St. Paul, Minnesota. So that's kind of where our main operations are based out of. When we started looking at the Savannah facility, right, we partnered with our developers and things out there and started looking at what we could do to build that. We did secure some property, and we started looking at what the full development of that would entail. I got kind of sidetracked with this Hawaii thing. So I've been boots on the ground here and really working at trying to bring this location up as the first location. That I would say is more been on pause. We have the ability to press restart if we want to on that particular project. But when I ran my analyses to look at where it made the most sense in terms of socioeconomic impact, right, where the greatest good needs to be done, and recognize that as being islands, Savannah didn't really meet that requirement. And as a team, we had pre-agreed that we would prioritize what our tool asked us to prioritize to make sure we were being cohesive. So this is me staying true to that.
Well, that's great. It's our gain, and Savannah will just have to wait. So
yes,
thank you.
Yes, they'll have to wait. Yeah,
Brittany,
absolutely.
I think that last comment you made about choosing Hawaii Island, I think that's a question that folks may have as well. So why Hawaii Island? And given that a significant part of the feedstock is the carbon, essentially trash, right? The waste stream. There's a benefit for us here because we have a lot of waste that we just landfill, right? But there are other places across the globe that have a lot of trash, India, all these other places. So just curious about, and maybe you can expand on why Hawaii Island, like why us?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we did our piloting of our facilities and did our third-party verification, when the team came together and recognized just how efficient and spectacular what we were doing was, it put us in a little bit of turmoil actually internally as a group. My team was asking me from every different direction, right? We're in over 50 different countries as teammates. Everybody wanted to build in their country for a different reason. And they all had very valid reasons, right? They were strong reasons. And I got to the point where I knew that whatever decision that I made was very likely going to fracture the team and upset a lot of the people on the team who were very passionate about where we selected the first full-scale facility to be built up at. So in order to remain cohesive as a group and make sure that we were staying true to our foundations and principles, I suggested that we make it a data-driven decision instead. And we said, okay, why don't we build up a tool? So we pulled together a GIS package and we layered that with a bunch of different things that we argued about, right? Put our boxing gloves on and finally reached consensus on. But we tied that together with a decision down select matrix. And so that looked at things like the socioeconomic impact of developing the solution in different arenas. That was big for our policy, equity, and culture teams, right? We also looked at things like the cost of energy in particular locations around the world. We looked at places that had historically very fertile soils that had been depleted for we don't know what reasons, but looking at soil health and data. We also looked at impact of some of the climate factors like sea level rise. We looked at things like access to clean water or water poisoning or dilution issues, and so on and so forth. So we built all this stuff up, and I think we got to a place where everybody really felt like with the issues that we had built in and we had prioritized that their country was gonna rank on the top of the list. Everybody thought that. And then we ran the tool and we all really had to sit down and think about it. We're like, okay, the tool must be broken, first of all. So let's go back and take a look. But the more that we looked into it, we realized that the tool wasn't broken, just our idea, and perception of the world had been probably broken. And the top 70 some locations were all islands. And that was really a big indicator for us. We did not expect that at all. I expected it to be LA or Dubai or India or China, like somewhere you just think of as dirty, right? And no offense to anybody from any of those locations, but it's just like the idea I think that's pushed on us by society and by marketing also is that a lot of these island nations are, they've got their stuff together. right? There are these eco locations and and everything is creme de la creme in these locales. And so the idea that they would be some of, the places that needed the solutions the most really didn't come across until your hindsight kicks in, right? And you learn more about the locations. So when we realized what we needed to do, that's really when we started working on decentralizing the solution. We started looking at what is important in terms of building up requirements or building out requirements, really, because we had built-in requirements of things like rail access and access to major ports. And a lot of the Pacific Island nations specifically, and a lot of the island nations elsewhere, don't have access to those sorts of resources, right? That's not a normal or accessible commodity for those folks. So we really worked on then decentralizing the solutions specifically for island implementation. And I had 2 team members who grew up in Hawaii. And so they came to me and sat me down and they said, Brittany, we're working on scaling it to the full community size for the first time. And that comes with its own obstacles, right? Regardless of how modular your system is, regardless of X, Y, and Z, there's always something that pops up, right? That's why integration specialists, that's why we exist in the first place. And so it was really important for us, as we sat down and we said, okay, we want to reduce a lot of the other complexities that are going to go hand in hand with building up for the first time. Why not do that somewhere, where it's in the same country, right, as you, where you can speak the language, where you understand the financial banking systems, where you understand the laws and know how to navigate the corruptions and things along those lines. And then for locations 2, 3, 4, 5 and onward, we can do it in other places, right, where there is corruption and you can worry about figuring out how to navigate, those issues, but the scaling issue then will not, will have been figured out and surmounted. So that's really what we did. And I said, you know what, I'll spend some time on each of the islands and get a feel for what the issues are. And if there's community engagement and if there's invitation to be here and build, then that looks like it could be a good fit. And if there's not, that's okay too, right? There are a lot of other island nations that are doing a lot to have us be there right now. So, and maybe that would be a better fit. And so that's really why we came here. I spent 30 days on Oahu. That went extremely well, built up a lot of strong relationships there. We have a lot of people interested in some pilot facilities, and we're doing some work with the Hawaii DOT in that arena. And then additionally, came over here to Hawaii. And when I arrived here, I got the really, really good fortune of meeting Mitch Roth right out of the gates. And he was just fantastic. He pulled a meeting together and I got to meet, a lot of the people that he thought were movers and shakers in terms of making some things happen. So, I got to meet Riley and Doug and Ramsey and all those folks. And then really started to take a community-based approach also. So working a lot with a lot of the different community-facing organizations, a lot of the nonprofits, a lot of the individuals, a lot of people, I think, who had very strong opinions about different topics in the past and trying to understand where those are coming from and moving around a lot to try to get a feel for what each of the communities is really facing. A lot of times what we think our problems aren't the root of our problems. So just trying to dive into that and figure out how we can be of most service. And there's just been so much momentum in that we find ourselves still on the Big Island about 8 months later.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else with questions? Do raise your hand. Oh, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this at your last meeting, but what's the company that you're working with?
Yummet, Y-U-M-M-E-T.
Riley and Doug and everybody else knows the problems we're having here. And Kiko has recently put out an RFP for alternative energy proposals. Have you guys considered that, using our landfill and our waste here on the Big Island?
It's something I'd be more than happy to look into. I have not seen that specific RFP, but I'd be happy. I know how to get to the RFP and solicitation sites, so I'd be happy to dive in. Is that a Hawaii County specific one, or is that a state level?
No, statewide.
Okay. Yep, I can dive
Yeah.
in and take a look.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Stan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, actually, it's a Hawaiian Electric RFP, so it's every island but
Uh-huh.
Kauai.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, my question, I have two questions actually.
Great.
Do you have your four basic environmental or air, soil kind of things you're trying to attempt? Do you have to build those things sequentially or simultaneously? I mean, when you start getting into using this technology, do you have to build all four components at the same time? And the second question would be, what is basically the upfront cost of starting to implement this at scale? And when I would say at scale, I'm talking about the scale of replacing the electricity or the transportation fuels for the state of Hawaii. Like, what's the return on investment and how much is the upfront investment?
Yeah, great. That's good questions. Okay. The first question is kind of about, I think, I would say slicing the system apart, which doesn't really work too effectively for us. Think of it as one solution where the waste comes in as the input and all four of those commodities come out of the output. So I can't really say, hey, we're just going to do the concrete, we're just going to produce water, or we're just going to do this. It's really all of them existing simultaneously that makes it a closed loop ecosystem that makes sure that there's no waste stream that's produced. If you were to segregate only one part of the system, there's inherently a waste stream then, right? And we don't want to do that. The point of having all of them together is that there is no waste byproducts, right? That's kind of the appeal and really what we were going for. So while we could technically build it sequentially, we wouldn't, right?
It's basically a symbiotic relationship between all these.
Yes, it is. Very much so. And like I said, they're cross-subsidized, right? So one system that produces extra heat is leveraged. One system that needs water that's cooling, right? And while there's water being produced, is cooled. So it's all really, really synergistic. And the efficiencies that we get from it are highly due to the fact that all systems are running cohesively and together. So we most likely would not separate any of those, just more on principle and philosophy than anything else. Technically, it is achievable, but we think it's one of the traps that a lot of the larger organizations fall into. So we like to keep our hippie scale up, but we also want to make sure, right, our other side of our capitalism, is being taken into consideration also. So we're really looking for that synergistic overlap. Yeah. A little bit of hippie, a little bit of capitalism.
That feeds into the second question, because if you're going to build an entire symbiotic system that does all those things at the same time, what's the going in cost and, a return on investment when you do your capital expenditures?
Great question. And I'm blessed with having a fantastic team that helps support me in all of this. We have a beautiful CFO. Don't tell him I call him beautiful. Scratch that part out of the recording. But he is the former CFO of IBM. So he's run all of our financial analysis and models and everything for us. And it scales a lot, right? So, for example, when we're looking at our Savannah facility, that goes between $1.1 and $1.8 million. The facility that we're looking at here is much more smaller, right? We're looking at anywhere between $150 million and $350 million in terms of capex, depending on which of the waste streams I get the green light to process. So that's kind of where we're looking at. We are backed in that sense, so we do project financing. This would be, an individual standalone organization. So we're really looking at, making sure that the markets exist and that the community will exist and that the waste exists. And so long as all of those things converge, then we're greenlit to be here.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, Brittany, I just posted it in the chat, the Hawaiian Electric.
Ooh, thank you.
But it's for Oahu and Maui.
Okay.
So as long as you employ our people on this island to feed them energy, that's fine with us.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that clarification.
Thanks, Riley. Harvey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Riley mentioned something interesting. Clearly there will be impact if we can be producing all of these amazing substances environmentally in terms of carbon drawdown. What will be the impact on our local economy as you scale this? Question number one. And then question number two is, what are key milestones that you've now established in your path forward?
All right. So first, we talked a little bit about the environmental impacts, right? I think specifically what we're looking at here, my intent, I would love to build this at a scale where we're drawing down about 2 megatons of carbon dioxide annually on the Big Island, because at that scale, we would be the first modern civilization that is net negative, right, with our comforts. Yeah, so for here on the Big Island, right? And so we're really excited about that potential ability. At the smaller scale version that I'm looking at building right now, I make the assumptions that I won't have access to the municipal solid waste and some other things, so long as I'm given the green light. So in my conservative models, we're looking closer to about 700,000 tons at that level, if we don't have access to some of the larger amounts of waste that are accessible, which is still great. But that's really our smallest version, right? Our smallest ability. And then let's see, the economy, right? So that's the environmental side of things. We're an employee-owned organization, so we do some pretty radical stuff. We run so many different models on how to ensure that the profit of and the benefit of building up a specific solution in an area, make sure that it pushes and promotes that benefit socially and economically in the local environment. So after modeling a whole bunch of different stuff, the thing that we found works the best is actually giving ownership to everybody who works at the organization. That's not like a C-suite specific thing. That's the janitor has ownership in the organization type of a thing. And that's the reason that we do our financing the way that we do, right? We do non-dilutive financing, right? It's a debt exchange instead of an equity exchange, specifically so then that the equity can be injected into the community around the different facilities. And we see that benefit in a lot of different, in both directions. Not only then is it very motivating for the people who are associated with the organization and with the solutions. They get to take pride and ownership in that, but they also become very inquisitive. They care a lot more about the solutions, and they also end up being a lot more innovative. They wanna push things forward. They wanna contribute. They wanna make things better, right? As things begin to age out, and we've seen that historically in a lot of different sectors as being very, very beneficial. So we're really excited about that portion of the organization. So I'd say that's a really big part of that, right? When I told you we did that down select, we look at socioeconomic impact. How do we make the biggest difference? At the different rungs of the ladder, right? And that's the way that we've found it to be the most effective. So that's specifically what we do, right? Non-dilutive funding into holding the equity so that can be distributed throughout the community. And then finally, milestones. So for us, our major milestones are finalization of scaling. So that's making sure inputs and outputs are matched appropriately for the specific facility here. We've made a lot of good progress there. I think we've made a lot more relationships, not only banking on, right, I think some of the more county-based resources, but done a much deeper dive into the private sectors and building up the relationships in those arenas. So we kind of have, plan A, plan B, and a little bit of even cross-subsidization in terms of inputs and outputs for the system right now. So that's been highly effective. So I would say our next big milestone is really when those two things converge, right? I was saying we're taking that top-down and bottoms-up approach simultaneously. So big milestone for me is making sure that those come together and that we can get, people to sign off specifically on the inputs and outputs. And once that's done, then that gives me a go-ahead. Once I have that go ahead, that means the CapEx can be released specifically for building the facility here in this particular location. And so I'd say that's the next big one. And then after that, we actually, I would say the next biggest one is finalization of the specific location. We've had a couple of different locations of interest, and making sure that we pull the trigger, but we don't want to pull the trigger on a location until the scale is finalized, because we wouldn't want to end up in the wrong spot for the wrong scale. So that's really, I would say, the next two major milestones.
Thanks, Brittany. And Harvey, I hope that answers your question. We have a couple of minutes left before our meeting ends here. If anyone has any pressing question, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, Brittany, I will give you a moment to, I guess, just wrap up. I mean, is there anything that we can do? Just curious about just, anything that you haven't mentioned that maybe you'd like to share with us to better understand what's happening and how we might be able to support. I mean, clearly, if based on what you've indicated, and me putting my climate action hat on, I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer. We absolutely need to figure out how to make this happen. So, any last words of guidance or requests?
For sure. Yeah. So some of the stuff, right, that I think is important as we start diving into the hydrogen side of things, right, the nascent market that I discussed earlier, is coming together. I know that there's been just so much excitement around the hydrogen hub type stuff that's coming out, right, across the entire nation. And there's been a lot of clamoring specifically for that. And I understand the excitement in that, but I think we also need to come together and pull together pragmatic solutions that both include that and don't, right? I think we need parallel paths forward, because we do have strong private industry partners, not only in myself, but in other individuals, right? We have a coalition of people specifically excited and ready to execute in that arena. And our particular organization sits in a really, really interesting and I think beautiful sweet spot, right? In the industry, it's kind of been this chicken or an egg thing for a good period of time, right? The industry wants to, we have the capability and, I think the gusto in order to produce hydrogen and green hydrogens at larger scales. And then at the same time, we have people in the private industries, right? Even in the IPO industries that are really looking at, okay, we can do aviation that's hydrogen based. We can do transportation that's hydrogen based. We can do maritime transport that's hydrogen based. But they don't want to put the CapEx in to do that if they're not certain that the supply is going to be there to actually service, right, the technologies that they're putting a very, very large investment into developing for the world and for the nation. And then on the other side, people are saying, okay, great, we can produce green hydrogens and hydrogens at large scales, but we don't want to put that CapEx in if the industry then decides that's not the direction that they're going to decide to go in, right? Because now they've invested this humongous CapEx. So we're really in a beautiful spot in terms of our specific organization because of our cross-subsidization. I'm profitable without the sale of hydrogen. I don't need to sell hydrogen in my system to be profitable, which is fantastic because it puts us in a position where we can produce concrete, we can produce agricultural, biochar, regenerative products, we can do water, and we can literally turn a dial up and down to figure out, to service that industry as it blossoms, right? So it kind of takes that chicken or an egg thing out of the equation specifically for us, because we're building, I hope that's in Hawaii, but we're building it wherever it makes the most sense. And I really, really do hope that that's here. But it doesn't depend on the hydrogen industry blossoming or blooming. It doesn't depend on the hydrogen hubs solicitation being selected. It doesn't depend on advancements in technology on the hydrogen production side of things. So it's really, really cool. And what I would like, maybe to invite is some additional conversation around what we can do to support kind of that middle ground between making those two things converge right now. Like on the production side of things, we're fantastic. On the side of things where people are starting to innovate in drop-in solutions or alternative solutions for whether it's fuel cell or combustion, or ammonia-based energy, that's fantastic. But I think we also need to be looking at that middle piece, right? And that middle piece is really the integration between the supply and where we foresee the demand being. And I think that is a conversation for all islands, and especially if Hawaii Island is getting serious about utilizing potential geothermal and doing it at larger scales here. Like that part of the equation needs to be discussed in much more detail. And I'm diving into those discussions, and I invite every single person and anybody who wants to be a part of that discussion to please join us. We've got a lot of ideas, and we've got the leading experts in the world in this arena with us. So would love to further conversations, and I will drop my contact information down here also so that everybody knows how to get a hold of me. Here's my email address. I'm extremely responsive on LinkedIn, so if you guys utilize LinkedIn, please find me there also. But here's all of my contact information. Here we go. And I'll find LinkedIn and drop it in there also. But okay, maybe that's too many words for closing. Sorry, Noel.
Sorry, I was muted. No, we're a few minutes over, and I think we should be able to close unless there's a last minute. Mitch, I just saw you pop in, so I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a comment. But yeah, we're over. Brittany, thanks very much for participating, for joining. Looking forward to a future conversation. And you did raise quite a few questions here around, future conversations that we should have, so we go into this journey, eyes wide open is what they say. So with that, I thank everyone for joining. We will be posting this recording eventually on our website. And yeah, until next time. I don't have a guest speaker for next week, but if any of you have, potential guests that you'd like to invite, let me know. Thanks very much. Have a good weekend. Aloha.
Thanks so much, Noel. Our team.
Guys.